Hi everyone, welcome back to Grid Talk. Once again, I am your host, Olacy Larkin, and today I am gonna try to do something a little different, and I feel like my voice is absolutely terrible on recording, and listening to the video podcast makes me want to fall asleep. So I think I get in my head and I think about too much about what I'm gonna be saying. So today I am gonna try something a little different and try to get my brain off of talking, because once I start thinking about it, I sound like a robot and I hate it. So today I have been working on this beaded beaded bag purse for about 6 months now, and everything's been like getting really busy with work and social media and everything, and I'm always tired, so I can't find time to work on it. So I am going to try to work on it, there go my beads, while I'm talking and give my brain something else to think about. But this is the progress. It is a Monet inspired beaded purse, and it has I'll put the picture up here. It has it's inspired from 3 paintings. So the first one is, of course, water lilies on the pond. The second is water lilies under a bridge. And the third one is morning on the sun. So it's going to be kind of, let's see if I can do this. This foreground here will be the water lilies on the pond. These are the water lilies, and then I have to get more beads and kind of gradually lighten these dark water blue. And then I don't know if you can quite see it, but let me see if I can get a piece of paper to show it. Give me a second. Just gonna use my notebook that I use for paddock stuff, and let's see. Oh, you can't even really see it. Right there is gonna be the bridge, so it's gonna be the middle ground, and then on the very top, which I've started working on, let me find my place once again. There we go. Okay, so top is going to be morning on the sun. So I have a little bit of light blue, and then I'm gonna start going in with darker beads to kind of set the scene. So while I'm doing that, I will be talking about F1 and continuing on our series, The Birth of F1. Last week was also a video podcast, and we were talking about I had Janella on, and we were just talking about sports and F1. So if you watched that, thank you. If you didn't, go and watch it. It's in the Grid Talk playlist on YouTube. We're also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so be sure to subscribe on there. And follow us on Instagram. So let's get to it. The last part of this series was the birth of F1, how we went from wheels to race cars to rocket ships. And today we are going to be talking about how it became the pinnacle of motorsport. It took about 30 years. I do have my notes, and ignore my reflection in my other mirror. I do have notes, but I'm gonna try to look at them as little as possible, because I feel like, again, I turned into a robot, and I'm so sick and tired of that, and I'm trying to avoid that. So let's get into it. It took about 30 years for F1 to be considered a big sport and to be considered the pinnacle of motorsport. So I'm going to read a little bit of my notes. Let's see. So we left off with the first season and the first race that started in Silverstone, which Silverstone is this weekend. Ironically, it's on July 4th, so I think that's a little bit funny. But I won't be able to watch Silverstone because I am going to be working for my dad and then working my actual other job that actually pays. In 1950, we got our first world champion, Giuseppe Farina, and in 1951, we got our, let me double check. Yes, in 1951, we got our second world champion, who was Juan Fangio, and he was actually a teammate of Farina's at Alfa Romeo. Let me flip. Hold on. So, Fangio actually went on to win the World Drivers' Championship 3 more times. So he has a total of 4 championships under his belt. And he dominated the 1950s seasons. Out of 51 races, he won 24. And again, there wasn't a lot of races going on at the time because it was a new budding sport. But at the end of 1950 is when changes really began to happen, and changes to the cars were made, and these changes would really make history in the sport. So let me get my first beads in. I have to I gotta study these all these notes I take more because I feel like I'm reading from them all the time, and I shouldn't be reading them. I should know them by heart. Hold on a second. These beads are being really annoying. So this might actually be a little hard to do because I have to pay attention to my beading, but I also have to pay attention to what I've written. And by the way, this is my notebook. And let's see. This is... Actually, I'll give you guys a look into my notebook. This is when I started planning out everything. I write so much. This book actually goes through like 3 different eras of social media that I wanted to do. I had a podcast a couple years ago that was called I think, because it was kind of a joke because I say a lot and I think a lot, and I thought it was appropriate. But yeah, I have analytics for that, and then slowly started working on business stuff and a media company, playing around with ideas, and then I started playing around with the idea of the paddock, and I started making notes. But yeah, this was the initial pages for episode 1. More pages, and then that's where the second part starts, and then we flip through all content ideas, etc., and then we're back. And so I put a lot of work into these, and so let's try to get through it. So as we said, changes were made to the car, and I believe it was something to do with the engines. Again, I ran out of time to fully research this, and if we really get into everything that ever happened in Formula One, we're gonna be here till the end of time, and I don't really want to do that. So we are going to be kind of skimming, but let's head into the 60s. The 60s were, 60s had a couple changes. The Indy 500 was removed from the F1 calendar, and the US Grand Prix moved first to Florida and then to California, and then it settled in New York. And actually, in the last episode, I was talking to one of my members, to Janella, and saying we should have a New York City Grand Prix because New York City is the biggest city in the US, and instead of having a Grand Prix in Washington, D.C., or in all these really like money-grabbing places, I think having a street circuit in New York City would be kind of a cool idea. I know the general opinion of street circuits is we don't want them, we don't need them, we don't like them, but you cannot say that Monaco this year was not interesting. Was it depressing? Yes, but it was interesting, and I think street circuits can be interesting. I personally, my favorite street circuit is Singapore. My dream is to go to Singapore and go to the Singapore Grand Prix because I think it's so cool and it's so beautiful. But we're getting sidetracked. So, in the 60s, as I said, the Indy 500 was no longer on the US or on the Formula One season, in the Formula One season. That was in, I believe it's upstate New York. So the 60s kind of introduced us to F1 icons and legends, but back then they hadn't yet earned the titles. But towards the end of the 60s, you'll notice some familiar names. So while Juan Fangio dominated the 50s, it was Jim Clark who dominated the 60s. Eventually, I'd like to do a series of drivers, F1 drivers, and that's also a very long and intense history. But so yeah, Jim Clark dominated the 60s, and sorry, I'm trying to get my beads going. Oh no. He won the championship in, hold on. See, what I did was I wasn't paying attention and I looped the thread around the fabric, not through. So give me a second. I think that's good. Yeah. All right. Oh, that's my issue. All right, let's recalibrate. So yes, he won the championships in 1963 and 1965. And 60s also unfortunately saw quite a few tragedies. It was a dangerous sport. It still is to this day, but there have been many, many safety precautions and regulations put in to protect drivers and make it a slightly safer sport. So yeah, the first tragedy was Wolfgang von Trips. He crashed in Monza in 1961, and the accident took the lives of 13 other spectators. So it was a very large accident. And when I go over drivers, or I do my series on drivers, I will also look at this driver, Wolfgang von Trips. And not to kind of, I'm doing it again. What the hell? Oh wait, never mind. Not to gloss over, other notable winners of the 1960s were Graham Hill, John Surtees, and Jackie Stewart. I feel like I've heard the name Graham Hill and Jackie Stewart quite a bit, and I feel like I've heard them. But again, I don't know everything about F1. One of the reasons I started this series was so I could get more familiar with the ins and outs of the sport, versus just watching the races every week or every race week. But I feel like those names are going to come back. So keep them in mind. And let's move on to the winning teams. So there's this team, the All-American Racers. How very American. They became the first U.S. team to win a World Drivers' Championship. And yes, so it was in 1961 that the U.S. round moved from Florida to California, and then shortly after that, it moved to New York, and it would remain there for 20 years. I had no idea that there was actually a race in New York. I thought my idea of a street circuit in New York City was completely original, but apparently not, because I think it was a track. I don't think it was a street circuit. So New York has had races, and I think they should make a comeback, because then I could possibly be able to go, instead of traveling cross country to go to a race, which I don't mind, but it is a lot of money, and it's very expensive to travel for races. So also, if you've never been to a Grand Prix, don't worry, I haven't either. Many Formula One fans haven't been to a race, and that's perfectly fine. Eventually we'll all get there one day. We just go at different speeds, and that's perfectly fine. There's nothing to worry about. I need new beads. Oh, I'll just go with lighter blue. So yes, the US Grand Prix would remain in New York City for the next 20 years, and that brings us into the 1970s, where, oh come on, don't tangle, don't, where we saw yet another tragedy, and this one happened during a practice session in Italy, I'm guessing Monza, and the driver was, okay, I think it's a German name, so I might pronounce it wrong. I apologize in advance. Jochen Rindt, or is it Jochen Rindt? So the thing about this driver is he made unbreakable F1 history by being the first driver and only driver to win the Formula One World Drivers' Championship posthumously. He had a comfortable lead in the season when he passed away, and he ended up keeping that lead even after he passed away. So Formula One has never had a posthumous world champion since then. So, through tragedy, unfortunately, he did make history, and let's pray that never ever happens again. The 1970s saw many different experiments and inventions created for the cars, and there's actually a car with 6 wheels. I believe it was 2 in the front. No. I'll put a picture right there. I saw a picture when I was looking it up, and I think it was 2 in the front, like 2 layers in the front, and then 2 in the back. So like, I guess 4 in the front, and then 2 in the back. I don't think that went very well. It was from the team Terrell. Wait, no. Yes. And the team Lotus also experimented with gas turbine engines. And there's also experimentation with all-wheel drive. Many of these changes made the cars too heavy, so they were abandoned and scrapped eventually. I believe there was something about an extremely powerful, maybe it was the turbo engine. But let's go in order because I'm losing my place. So with the 70s came 3 very dominating teams. We have Tyrrell. I was just watching Game of Thrones, so of course I'm pronouncing it Tyrrell. So Tyrrell, Lotus, and McLaren. And as I said, I mentioned Jackie Stewart earlier, and it also introduced us to Niki Lauda and Mario Andretti. So as the sport gained more traction and drivers were making headlines, businesses started to realize that Formula One wasn't just a sport, it could be a major business opportunity because it takes a lot of money to build a Formula One car. And businesses began to take that opportunity to jump on the Formula One bandwagon. And as the TV coverage increased, businesses began to advertise, and we'll get into that a little bit later on probably as it becomes more of a practice, but that's where sponsors started coming in. So from the 70s we will move on to the 80s, which was what I consider, so I've separated this series into what I think are good segments. So the first was Birth of Formula One. The second was the second right now is Rise to the Pinnacle. And then the third one will be the Golden Age, which I think it's fair to call, from like the 90s to the like 2010s, the Golden Age, because we had a lot of major racers and legends in the making. And I'm calling the final part, which I'm guessing will be from like 2010 to now, maybe 2015 to now, the new age. So I hope I made a fair assessment that this is what I think, how I think the parts of Formula One could be separated into. But I think the 80s helped us move into the Golden Age. And the 80s is probably when, 30 years after the formation of the first Formula One race and season and championship, it became to be known as the pinnacle of motorsport. as we know, Formula One is very glamorous, and it takes a lot of money to be in the Formula One industry. So it attracts wealth, it attracts money, and I think that's when people start really watching it as a serious sport. But in the 80s, the 20-year stretch of the US Grand Prix in New York came to an end, and the US Grand Prix moved back to California, and there were actually short-term contracts with Las Vegas, Detroit, and Phoenix. As we know, the Las Vegas Grand Prix would make a comeback quite a few years later. Actually, I don't know when I'll have to look it up. I'm also thinking of doing a series on circuits and history of circuits. So yeah, we'll get into that then. I actually have a really great idea for a trip, and it would be to go over and visit like around the world, every single track. I was thinking of doing it just from recent years, but I think it'd be cool to, if the tracks are still there or the areas that they were are still there, I think it'd be really cool to go visit them. So maybe that will be further down the line. But yes, as we know, the Las Vegas makes a comeback later on in Formula One history. McLaren, in the 80s, McLaren made a huge, or orchestrated a huge invention that really helped to bring down the amount of tragedies that had been occurring in F1. Between the years of 1960 and 1970, there had been 14 fatal accidents, and McLaren came up with this concept of a survival cell, and it was made from carbon fiber. I'm not even going to attempt to say this word. MONOCUQUE. Monocoque. And it helped to improve the safety of the cars. I should probably look up that word. So, with this survival cell, the 80s drivers were able to race through the 80s with only two, which saying only seems very disrespectful, but the amount of fatal deaths had been decreased to 2 with McLaren's new survival cell. The 80s is also when the French engine manufacturer Renault came into the picture, and they created a very powerful, very high-powered engine, turbo engine, which made the cars so incredibly fast that it was actually banned because it was just too dangerous, and the horsepower reached up to 1,500, which is insane. Let me look up what today's Formula One cars are. So it says they can currently reach over 1,000, which maybe they're just as fast. But clearly there was a lot of concern about how quickly these 1980s cars could go with the turbo engine. So they were banned, and it also had issues. It created issues with fuel tanks and boosts. So they were banned by the end of the decade. So let's talk a little bit about teams. I ran out of time to research because I kind of burned out. So let's talk a little bit about teams. McLaren began to dominate in the 80s, and that was in part because of their drivers. We begin to hear names like Niki Lauda and Ayrton Senna, and there's one more. Oh, Alan Prost. Between those three drivers, they gave McLaren 5 world championships in the 80s, and they would go on in the next decade to make even further history. Unfortunately for Ayrton Senna, it would end in a tragic crash, but he is still one of the drivers that we talk about to this day. And so there we have it, the first 30 years of Formula One, and how it rose to the pinnacle. As a recap, because I feel like I got sidetracked, we went from Juan Fangio winning 4 world championships in the 1950s to Jim Clark winning and dominating in the 60s. And then we had the US Grand Prix moving from place to place, and we had a lot of experimentation. We had a lot of tragedies, unfortunately, and we had a lot of legends come to the forefront of the sport, and Formula One began to be seen as a business opportunity as well as a sport. So with all that, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I wasn't as boring as I was in the last 2. This is how much I got done, just this tiny little corner. But yeah, this might be a good way to do it. I feel like I did better. So, but yeah, I'm actually very excited for my Monet-inspired purse. This is only the front. And then I think the back, I'm just gonna do like striated colors of Monet. Monet is my favorite artist. So I'm really excited for how this will come out. With that, I will say thank you, and please, 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 if you feel like you'd like to, but please, subscribe to our channel and follow us on Instagram, follow us on our blog. Oh shoot, I have to write the blog. It's a lot to do. And subscribe on Apple Podcasts, here on YouTube, and Spotify, and follow us on Instagram, and we can build a more positive and kind community in F1, and hopefully make all of our F1 dreams come true. I guess with that, I will say stay kind, stay positive. To anyone going to, or actually by the time this will be posted, the Silverstone Grand Prix will have already happened, so we can debrief in the next episode about that. But yeah, thank you, and stay kind, stay positive. I'll see you next week.